This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm sitting here with Olivier Humbrecht. I still can't get it. This is Jamie Drummond with Good Food Revolution, and today I'm sitting here along with 4 wonderful bottles of wine and winemaker Olivier Humbrecht. I pronounced it correctly?
It's almost good, yes.
Almost good, okay.
Humbrecht.
Humbrecht, okay, there you go. Now, if you wouldn't mind, Olivier, would you mind explaining a little bit about your house, your family's house?
It's a family estate. We make wines from our own vineyards and take care of them ourselves. It's a 40-hectare estate which is spread over 5 different villages in Alsace, so that's roughly 60 kilometers apart. And the estate was created in 1959 by my parents. Zind is my mother's name, Humbrecht is my father's name. But on the Humbrecht side of the family, we are wine growers from father to son since the early 17th century. So I'm the number 12 in line.
Now, what is it, you would say that, what is it about your family's house that differentiates it from many of the other Alsatian houses?
That's a tricky question. Without going perhaps too technical, it would be first quite vast and spread estate and vineyards. Most small wine growers in Alsace would have between 5, 10, 15 hectares. So having 40 hectares in Alsace, we range amongst the biggest in size estate. Not necessarily in production, because also unlike the average in Alsace, our average yield is pretty low. We usually harvest between 30 and 45 hectare, when the region as an average is very often always above 80 being the maximum limit.
Right.
Plus, as you know, in France we always allow 10-20% extra. So it explains why in Alsace yields are usually between 80-85 hectoliter every year. We also cultivate our own estate biodynamically. Not many people do that, but nowadays Alsace is turning into quite a green area, so it's a little bit less of a special thing, because there is about 7-8% of the wine growers in Alsace which are now organic, which is good. What else makes us different? We have a lot of staff. We do our vineyard work mostly by hand with small machines or by horse, but we use manpower a lot. So on per hectare we have about 7 to 8 times more labor costs than the average in Alsace. And if we do 2-3 times less wines per hectare, on a bottle of wine we have between 15 to 25 times more labor costs on a bottle of wine than the average in Alsace. Average.
Now, a little birdie told me, as we were speaking about the vineyards right now, a little birdie told me to mention the term green harvest to you and to see what would come from your mouth.
Well, green harvest, you know what it means. It means cutting grapes when they're still green, slightly before a month or so before the harvest, in order to reduce the crop, hoping that the remaining grapes will take more energy from the vine so they can ripen better and you can make a better wine. Green harvest is a typical example of a technique which has been overly publicized and making people believe that you actually make better wine with. But if you think about it really, you should ask yourself the following question: what went wrong so that people have to cut grapes so they can make better wines? So for me, someone who does a green harvest, I would always try to go back to the source of the problem. Why is there too much crop? Is it wrong clones? Is it wrong rootstock? Is it density of plantation which is too low, allowing the vines to be too vigorous? Are these growers using too much fertilizers?
Yes. Yes.
Do they prune the vines too long? In that case, they don't know maybe how to prune the vineyards. Are the vines too young? Maybe. Is the soil more like a potato field instead of a good viticultural soil? There's many reasons. Some you can fix. Some you can fix with big problems, like if it's the wrong rootstock or the wrong clone. You only have one solution. You have to pull out the vine and start again, and then you can wait another quite a few years before making a good wine. Some solutions, some problems can be fixed very quickly. If it's a pruning problem, fertilization problem. So I would first fix the cause of the problem, then removing grapes. Because when you remove grapes, you create an extra stress to the vine. The vine registers that it loses its pips. The pips are producing specific hormones that makes the vines acknowledge of their presence. If those pips are removed before they're fully ripe, the vine registers the loss, increases the fertility of the buds, which are the latent buds on the vine, that specific vintage. So the following year, when these buds will eventually grow, they will carry more clusters, they will also carry more grapes. So you increase again the crop. So once you start to use green harvest as a tool to reduce yield, the danger is that the following years you might have to use it again and again and again, and that is also a problem for me, because what's the point to make the vine work hard to produce clusters that will eventually be cut off before the harvest?
So it's interesting because the term green harvesting seems to be have been adopted by the marketing quotient of wine companies, and it's used as a selling point when you're walking through the vineyards and they boast of their green harvest.
I would run away from every wine where the people tell me it's been produced via green harvest, definitely. And also, technically, green harvest are often done by people in summer. Most of the time, I don't know about the whole world, but I know in France, August is the month of holidays. It's a month where usually wine growers can take a little break, and then they would hire unqualified people to do the green harvest, that very often wouldn't know which cluster to take away. And also, a vineyard is very often not populated with the same vines from the beginning to the end of the row. You might have vines that are perfectly normal. You might not want to take away grapes. Some other vines, you might have 2 or 3 times more clusters. There you might want to cut more than just a third of the grapes. Those people usually don't know what to do. As they need to go quickly, they might cut the first available grape they can see, which often are the nicest also, and keep grapes that are still green or have attacked by disease hidden in the middle of the canopy. So for all these reasons, I would shy away. But there is other ways to make a vine produce less, more cleverly, but you have to take time. Accept that a young vine is very often overcropping because it's very vigorous, and a good grower should gradually show the vine that it's okay to produce fruits, it's no problem, and a vine which is allowed to produce more fruits, the following year will produce less and less and less, and gradually the pruner can take thinner wood, shorter canes, remove a bud there and there, and so when the vine is more mature, at 15-20 years old, gradually you reach the harmonious crop that the vineyard should be able to produce.
Which is almost the antithesis of many people's practices in the vineyard, is it not?
Well, who said that you should sell a Grand Cru wine from a 6 or 7 year old vines? I think it's a bit of a robbery,
Now, speaking of the Cru system in Alsace, it has been a point of argument between many people regarding the whole appellation system in Alsace. What are your thoughts upon the Cru system? Do you think it needs to be realigned? Do you think, well, obviously some people benefit from the Cru system more than others, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, we sell all our wines according to an origin system, terroir concept. And it's perfectly understandable that the better vineyard will produce the best wines, and vineyards which are not as fairly located will produce wine with less minerality or less impact. I don't think there's such a thing that a vineyard can be good or bad. It's just that some vineyards have a higher potential to overpower the grape variety and show a stronger personality. Eventually, these vineyards produced different wines with strong character, and through the time it became the vineyard that were the most praised, talked about, eventually selected, and this vineyard, after a long process, historical process, became eventually Grand Cru or Premier Cru in some areas and so on. So for me, the notion of origin is not only important, but it's fascinating, because you can learn something from the vineyard, you can go and see it, you can feel by yourself or the area, the whole context of the vineyard, you can go and look at it. You can understand why the wine tastes different or tastes like that. And also, for me, wine is also a cultural object. Of course, it should not be too complicated, but when you have something to say about the wine, it makes it also more fun, than just a beverage that has some alcohol and flavor into it. So the notion of origin for me is absolutely important, whatever level you are. Are the Grand Cru system properly classified today? Because I guess that's basically your question.
Yes.
I would say, well, it's a modern classification. Anything which is done modernly can have some flaws, because you have economic interest, you have political interest or problems. So, of course, you can always do something better. And we ended up with a classification in 1983 and followed by 85 or 50 Grand Cru. Another one was added on a few years ago. We have now 51 Grand Cru in Alsace. I really believe that every single 51 Grand Cru in Alsace deserves to be Grand Cru. Of course, when you take 51 Grand Cru, some are always more famous than other ones. You see this in Burgundy, you see this in Bordeaux, you see this in every single area that have Grand Cru. Maybe some Grand Cru were classified slightly too big. Perhaps some would need a little bit of a diet and lose a few hectares on the left and the right, on the top and the bottom. But at the end, I would think that the consumers, the people who buy the wines, and the producer, if they are reasonable, will understand very well in which part of the vineyard you have the better vines. And perhaps if there will be eventually in the future a new classification or a re-evaluation of what has been done, perhaps some Grand Cru may lose a little bit, some other one may gain perhaps a little bit. I don't know. I wouldn't criticize the system because some Grand Cru are slightly too big, you see. I would just, on the opposite, try to work out how to make it better, what should be done, maybe also make the rules perhaps stricter. Is it still necessary to chaptalize wines in Grand Cru today? For me, no. If you need to add acids or do things like this, are you in a really Grand Cru vineyard? I would say no also. Should you plant more vines per hectare in a Grand Cru than in an average vineyard? I would say yes, to lower the number of clusters per vine. All these rules have to be perhaps perfected, but the system as it exists is good and necessary and interesting.
Now, please excuse my ignorance here, but you mentioned chaptalization. I was under the impression that in Alsace one would rarely need to chaptalize one's wines.
Well, we haven't done that for, I don't even remember for how long. It's certainly over 20 years that we haven't bought a gram of sugar to add in the wine. Alsace has got, it's true, a warm continental climate in summer. Very often a pretty nice, what we call Indian summer. September, October can be very attractive in Alsace because we don't have all these kind of oceanic, maritime influence that some other region can get, and with all these equinox rains and all this. So yeah, long growing season. It's easy today to get a proper ripeness in Alsace if you do good viticulture, if people don't exaggerate with the yields, and if also you plant, clones and massal selections which are quality orientated and not overproducing. when you have overproduction in a vineyard, then the risk of unripeness is still there, and then still today a lot of people have to correct that by adding some sugar to the wine. It's limited. In Grand Crus, some Grand Cru forbid chaptalization. You know, each Grand Cru has its own committee that decides of the rules to be applied every single vintage. So some Grand Crus are perhaps a bit more forward than other ones in their thinking, I mean. And in some Grand Cru today, chaptalization is forbidden. Some other, it's only limited to 0.5%. In some other one, it could be 1%. But it's still less than the normal AUC. And even if it's authorized, it doesn't mean that all the growers are doing it.
Yes.
The people who work good, of course, would not use such a technique.
Now we're speaking about the specific climatic conditions in Alsace. Do these climatic conditions make biodynamic viticulture a lot more achievable or a lot more easily achievable than in perhaps other regions
Believe
of France?
me, every wine regions in the world has their own problems.
Yes.
And of course, we don't have that kind of warm humidity that maybe some more close to the sea vineyard can get.
Yes.
But then if we have less mildew disease, we might have more oidium, or we might have some more rot problems also. You know, every region has its own little problems, and which makes it difficult to cultivate. But today, good biodynamists, people who know how to apply the principles in a good way and are thorough about it and work hard to do it, they don't have problem whether they're in Bordeaux or in Alsace or in California or in Greece.
Now, sticking with the theme of climate, have you seen any changes with global warming or with, shall we say, oscillations in temperature over the time that you have been working with your family's estate?
Yes, well, I've only been working since 1989. That was my first vintage. So is 20 years a big time enough to notice something? I would say almost yes. Statistically, it's been proven in our area that the average bud break, the average flowering date, and the average start of the harvest, these are kind of dates you can measure quite precisely, are now 16 days earlier than 50 years ago.
16 days in 50 years, that's quite
16
substantial.
days earlier, it is substantial. That's a fact.
Yes.
But then when you look at a specific vintage, we are talking about a statistic average. So of course, if you look at 2010, the vines are still struggling to even start to flower in some parts of Alsace, and we are now past middle of June. So we go back to a profile which is very typical from the 1950s and 1960s. So again, you can have people say, yes, but we still get vintages pretty cold and not as precocious. I definitely think there is you see less and less very, very late
Yes.
vintages. That's for sure. Yeah.
Now, I often think that the wines of Alsace are, particularly in North America, a little misunderstood, and particularly when it comes to where their place is at the dinner table. Where do you see Alsatian wines at the dinner table? How do you where do they fit within menus in your own family home and the like, and in more traditional restaurants in Alsace?
Well, I think our problem in Alsace is that first, having had a sort of troubled history in the past century, we're not perhaps able to create this image of a certain area with a typical kind of wines, like other regions of France we're perhaps able to get. The fact we have this complicated climate, which changed a lot within a short distance in our area, plus a hugely diversified geology, obliging us to use multiple grapes. If Alsace would only be one soil type, like you see in most other areas in France, perhaps we only cultivate 1 or 2 grapes, and that already would have been much, much easier for the consumer to identify our area to one style of wine. And then the change of climate can be huge from one year to the other. Some year being very late, some year being very precocious. That also means that we have a difference in style of wine from very dry to very sweet. So when you take everything into account, it makes quite a lot of different wines. And our area is also perhaps too small compared to bigger areas in France like Champagne, the Rhone Valley, Bordeaux, Burgundy, to communicate on our wines and really explain people how to use the wines. Because in fact, I don't think there's nothing better than Alsace wines to go with modern food.
By modern food, do you mean sort of very contemporary restaurant cuisine, or what do you mean by modern food?
What I mean by modern food is that today, whether you live in Canada, in France, anywhere in the world, you have access to a lot of different ingredients cooking, lots of different kind of recipes, and more what goes into the restaurant plates or at home. You have multiple ethnic influences. People use more easily spices. People use more and more, even without noticing it, sweet and sour combination. The mix of the salt, the savory, and the sweetness is more and more important in everyday food. And Alsace wine, with their richness, their aromatic power, the versatility that brings with choosing food, makes them actually excellent to go with this kind of cuisine.
I can remember when I was first studying the wines of Alsace many years ago now, reading a book that said that winemakers often think of the noblest grape of Alsace as being Riesling, whereas when you speak to many of the restaurateurs and the people who enjoy going out to eat, they think of Pinot Gris as being the greatest grape of Alsace. Do you have a favourite son or daughter when it comes to the grapes of Alsace?
No, it's impossible. But I would say that in terms of vineyard representation, there's more vineyards in Alsace capable to magnify Riesling than Pinot Gris, right, or even Gewürztraminer. So in terms of volume and amount of different wines, Riesling will still remain the king. In our case, Riesling is the number one grape variety with a third of the wine we make. But then Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris come close, very close by. Pinot Gris has been recently, or mostly in the 90s, a very fashionable and fast expanding grape in Alsace. 50 years ago, it only accounted for over 2% of the vines in Alsace. Today, it's well over 12%. That's mostly because in the past, the only Pinot Gris clones available were small berries, small clusters producing very small crops that would cost a lot to the growers to make. Rich wines that you keep only for special occasions, Christmas dinners and things like this, but very expensive wines also. And in the 80s, Pinot Gris was always the most expensive grape to buy to make wine in Alsace. Then, when modern clones came out, bigger clusters with a big wing, more clusters per shoots and per vines, all of a sudden, Pinot Gris became a more everyday kind of grape. Most growers could increase a lot their yields. All of a sudden, it became very profitable to make Pinot Gris because you could augment your yield, but still ask for the old times prices. So Pinot Gris was a very profitable grape for many times, until people started to realize that maybe it wasn't exactly quite the same. And all of a sudden, in the past 10 years, maybe not here, but definitely in France and in most countries in Europe, Pinot Gris has become today the most difficult grape to sell in Alsace.
Interesting.
Fashion always changes.
Now, on your family's estate, do you plant all of the authorized varietals?
We plant all the authorized varietals except Sylvaner.
Okay.
We used to have Sylvaner up to 99, and unfortunately we had to pull out our last vineyard. It was Perhaps today I would have kept it, but at the time it was complicated to keep. It was an old vine producing extremely low yield in a nice vineyard called Rottenberg, and extremely difficult to make profitable, because Sylvaner is a grape in Alsace that has a very low image. So as soon as you try to ask just a few euros more on a bottle, people would not accept to pay for it, even though some Sylvaner can be absolutely fantastic.
I have had a couple of examples, particularly with older vines. I've had some absolutely stunning examples of Sylvaner.
I know. Today, I almost regret having taken that vineyard out, but it's it was a decision made at the time under different conditions, different circumstances. It goes back into the early 90s. And it's certainly, definitely, it was a small vineyard. We could have kept it, and it was perhaps one of the mistakes we made. We also have another grape variety that was maybe your question at the beginning, called Chardonnay, that we grow in Alsace. Chardonnay is legal in Alsace, don't get me wrong, but you're only allowed to make sparkling wine with it. If we planted Chardonnay in the early 80s in a vineyard called Clos Vinsburg, it was more to create a blend with other grapes, mostly Auxerrois, to bring a grape variety that is capable to retain more acidity and more structure than Auxerrois, to be able to keep Auxerrois on the estate. It's a bit of a complicated thing, but in the 80s, we were not yet cultivating our vineyard in biodynamic. Acidity was sometimes a problem, and instead of adding things to the wine to make the acidity go up, I don't want to go any more into that, and use techniques which are not really, for me, good examples of quality. We thought that if we would blend the Auxerrois grape with something else that would bring the structure and the acidity to a nice grape I would like to keep in Alsace, which is the Auxerrois, then we would have a better wine. And it was the case. The Chardonnay has a much higher acidity for the same ripeness than Auxerrois. For a few years, we were blending all these together, Pinot Blanc, Auxerrois, and Chardonnay, and into our Pinot d'Alsace, or Pinot Blanc wine. Eventually, we got caught. We didn't do it to be against the law. It was purely for us as a sort of experimental thing. France can be so rigid in some of the wine laws. It's nice to have a little thing you can play a little bit with something new. And for us, the result was very, very good. So when we were told that we had to pull out the vines or sell the wine as a table wine, we chose the option of table wine. We wanted to keep those grapes, not do the mistake of maybe the Sylvaner. And since 2001, we are selling this wine as a vin de table. We just call it
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy making red wine?
We do make red wine. We have a little vineyard of Pinot Noir in the Heimburg. It's a third of a hectare. And my father was also a great fan of Pinot Noir because he trained a lot when he was younger in Burgundy. So he always had a great admiration of the red wines from Burgundy. He brought back a lot of cuttings from there. They planted in the 60s and all this. Perhaps not in the best vineyards possible then, but we always kept a nice and warm feeling for Pinot Noir in Alsace. Unfortunately, a lot of the top vineyards for Pinot Noir could also be great vineyards for Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris. And then I don't want to fall also in that direction where I want to take out, old vines in historical places that I know can produce fantastic Pinot Gris and Gewürztraminer and plant them with Pinot Noir, which today is the grape that sells the best in Alsace, the easiest, the quickest. I am pretty sure it's like the Pinot Gris in the 90s. It's a kind of fashion thing. I'm not saying that some people can make excellent Pinot Noir in Alsace, really challenging wines, but still our area is a red wine orientated area, so I don't think Pinot Noir should become one day too important.
You said a red wine dominated area. You meant white wine.
White wine. Yes, sorry. Yeah, red wine is small. White wine should always remain very important.
What kind of percentage is the red wine production?
Pinot Noir was about 2-3% 25 years ago. Today it's close to 12 or 13%.
Interesting. So it's gone up considerably.
It's like Pinot Gris 10 years ago.
Now, one last question. I always think of your house as being a very, very traditional house, and the wines being very traditionally made. There's a certain elegance and finesse in all of these wines that for me is the true Alsatian style, a traditional Alsatian style. I have over the last few years noticed some wineries producing very, very contemporary Alsatian wines, really moving away from the wines that I originally tasted when I first started tasting Alsatian wines. What do you think of these much more modern styles of wine that are being made?
By contemporary, you mean like use of new oak or?
They're doing all sorts of strange things, but sometimes getting away from. They don't quite have the same kind of minerality and intensity and purity of fruit that some of the more traditional styles do. Perhaps a little bit more accessible. I guess that would be
yes.
That would be my take on it.
With the apparition of technology and also chemicals in the vineyard and new clones, it became more and more easy for growers in Alsace to increase the crop size. So dilution is the number one enemy to make good wines. High production, high yields would always end up in sort of weaker, less interesting, dull wines. Of course, the yields today are lower than they used to be 20 or 25 years ago because the NAO, our legislator, is obliging Alsace to be, less and less in terms of volume. But still, 80 plus hectoliter hectare is not a small crop. Many other areas in France, I don't know if they envy us, but I'm sure some areas that have very cheap prices would be very much liking to be able to do as much wines as we do in Alsace per hectare. But of course, I don't think it's good for the future. There is also the apparition of new technology, aromatic yeasts, aromatic enzymes. There is not so much use of new oak or something like this, or tannins, wood chips in Alsace. That's not at all part of our area. Thank God for that. But on the other hand, with aromatic grapes, there is a lot of use of these very modern aromatic yeast or enzymes that provokes lots of new aromatics in the wines. Then we go to a direction which for me is not interesting also. Nice aromatics is brilliant. Too many aromatics can create confusion and might actually not be very interesting.
I'm just going to ask that question again, so it's a little bit more succinct from my end, if that's okay?
Yeah.
If that's all right?
Yeah.
The wines of Alsace I often think of as being some of the most marvelously aromatic in the world. I've heard that there is actually quite a lot of use of new aromatic yeasts now to bring out those particular aromatics. What are your thoughts upon that?
We like to make our wines go through fermentation with only wild yeast. It reveals more the character of the vineyard. It keeps the wines more different one to each other. Fermentation is slower. It's not a problem because you get more character and finesse into the wines. Modern yeast, they go fast. They isolate one or two aromatic elements and the wines are less complex, more powerful on the nose, but much, much less complex and sometimes boring.
Now, how long does it take your ferments when you are using natural yeast in your house?
Very fast would be a month. Normal would be 3 to 12 months. And very slow would be anything above 12 months. And I think the record in the cellar, I don't know yet because it's still fermenting.
Okay. So you do get stuck ferments at some points?
What defines stuck?
Okay, fair enough. Well, you said something's still fermenting right now, so...
Yes, it's a 2008, so
okay.
It's not going towards 2 years. But actually, we already had some wines fermenting for 2.5 years. But when you talk about very, very rich concentrated wines that have over 300 or 400 grams of sugar, you go back to vinification in Hungary with Essentia type of wines or very rich Trockenbeeren Auslese in Germany. They also have sometimes very long fermentation For me, there is not such of a stuck or problematic fermentation. The wine stops when the yeast cannot continue anymore, and it's totally natural that the fermentation is slow and struggling when you have a huge richness in the wine.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. You warned me that you did like to talk, and
Yes.
you were telling the truth. Thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution, and I'm looking forward to tasting your wines now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much.